Hello everyone, Big Clinky here, just making this video because I know that everyone is going to be asking me about this, and I don't want to clutter the comments of Path of Radiance videos with discussion of something else, and also I want to give a bit of an update on how Path of Radiance is going at the moment. For those watching the video as it's uploaded, I'm sorry that I haven't updated in a little while. Last week I had to help with some family stuff, so I wasn't able to record for the entire week, and then I went away from the weekend to see my sister, so I was pretty busy, and it's going to take me a little while to get back into the swing of recording and get back into getting a backlog together. I do have the next chapter recorded, however, it's gonna be a bit of a nightmare to edit, so please bear with me if it takes a while. I did something a little unique with that one. Also, I am working on recording a stealth version of Chapter 10. Oh man, this is going to be the death of me. It is insanely frustrating. I'm trying to not use a turn-by-turn walkthrough and just do it on my own. And the reason for that is that no turn-by-turn walkthroughs I've seen get Sephiron out. I want to get all the NPCs out, as well as getting all the chests and doing it the stealth way. I came very close one time, only to screw up at the last minute, so that was annoying. I might be working on that in the background, because I feel like I want to just get on with recording the main game as a break from that. It's really, really frustrating. But that's probably the least of your concern right now. All of you want to know what I think of the new Fire Emblem announcement, don't you? Now, this is not going to be a very detailed, in-depth analysis, because many other sites have done that already, and honestly, I probably can't pick up much that other people haven't already said. I just want to give my vague thoughts on what I think of this trailer, what my hopes are for the new game, and just a few things that came to mind when I saw it. Okay, so for starters, the continent actually has a name and a backstory. Thank you, Intelligent Systems. For now, I don't want to speculate on what the different territories actually mean. I'm just glad that we actually have names of locations now. Apparently, a lot of people are up in arms about the art style, but I actually quite like it personally. The character designs are more in line with Echo's, much more grounded rather than the more outlandish ones of some of the newer games, and I like that. But overall, the art style just has this very new and different feel to it, which I actually like. It really feels like this is a new step forward for the series. Kinda makes sense because this is the series' first return to home consoles in a long time. It's a little hard to describe the feeling, but I love it when a series' new installment looks like something totally new and unique, while still, in terms of its core gameplay, being the same series that I know and love. Speaking of core gameplay, units are actually units now. This really surprises me. The overall battle animations look very much inspired by Warriors, even the critical cut-ins are very Warriors-like. That might actually get me to go back and play that game, because it looks like it's going to have more influence on the series than I thought it would. It's pretty cool that the characters that you develop and control are more like squad leaders of their own groups of generic troops, which is more like how a real war would play out. For some reason, even though I've never actually played one of those games, I'm getting a bit of a Total War vibe from the way some of the graphics look. And it reminds me of that scrapped Fire Emblem game that was originally supposed to be the one after Radiant Dawn. According to the making of book, after Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn bombed in terms of sales, Intelligent Systems considered completely rebooting the franchise into a game that was kind of a hybrid of a traditional JRPG and a real-time strategy game. This looks kind of similar, while still very much being a turn-based strategy at heart, which I like. The animations may look different, but it seems like the battle system is mostly the same. Your character hits the enemy, enemy hits your character. It's just that there are some troops in the background now. In terms of other core gameplay elements confirmed to be returning, weapon durability is back. Weird thing though, I actually didn't mind it being gone in Fates and Echoes. I actually think Fates, for the most part, balanced the lack of weapon durability decently. There were a few exceptions. I mean, I thought that legendary weapons were pretty terrible in that game, and killer weapons really should not have been infinite use. But it did it decently well, and Echoes was alright as well in that regard. Really, I didn't notice the lack of weapon durability, or at the very least, I didn't feel it impacted strategy all that much. So it being back, I'm really not for or against that. What does worry me, however, and this is actually my biggest worry about the game so far, it looks like Weapon Triangle might be gone. And I really hated the lack of weapon triangle in Echoes. That was one of the things that made Echoes' gameplay really irritating for me. So yeah, there are some people who suspect that unit formations might be replacing the weapon triangle, which I guess makes sense. I mean, there are games like Age of Empires where certain formations were considered effective against certain other formations. Main thing is, I just really hope hit rates aren't as janky as they were in Echoes. Oh, that game was just so frustrating with its hit rates. Please, intelligence systems, bring back true hits. It just made the series so much better. Speaking of Echo's influence, it seems like combat arts are back. Now, combat arts were a mechanic I was always very conflicted on. I really liked the idea of combat arts. Getting to choose to activate skills at any time and paying a cost for them was generally a bit more strategic than having to just hope they activate on a random chance. The thing was, in Echoes, I felt that combat arts were either stupidly good, like Alm's Double Lions, or that one killer bow, I think it's Hunter's Volley? Yeah, it's Hunter's Volley. Or utterly useless, like most things that weren't Twin Lions or Hunter's Volley. I also really wish that you kept your learned combat arts when you switched weapons. That was one aspect of Echoes that I always found irritating. Being forced to equip certain weapons if you wanted their combat arts. I prefer if it worked like Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Yes, I am actually bringing that game up in a serious Fire Emblem discussion, because its skill system is the kind of one that I want to see for combat arts. You work on a weapon, learn the skills off of that weapon, then switch to a different weapon to learn that weapon's skills, while keeping the skills you got from the first weapon. Considering that weapon durability is back though, I have a feeling they're not gonna restrict skills to specific weapons anymore, so that'll be good. We did see a couple of traditional skill icons in some of the screenshots though, like one for Vantage and one for Wrath. Now, the Wrath one really interests me because it's using its icon from Heroes rather than the traditional Lightning Bolt icon that the skill used to have. And this leads me to something that I've always been excited for Fire Emblem 16's inevitable announcements. I'm wondering which skills from Heroes are gonna make the jump into the mainline series, and how that will affect things. I've always thought that would be really interesting. There are quite a lot of Heroes skills that could do some interesting things for traditional Fire Emblem gameplay. I wonder how Armor March will affect things, potentially. There are some hero skills that are kinda dumb and I wouldn't want to see them in a mainline Fire Emblem game, like that one, I forget exactly what it's called, I think it's like Vengeful Fighter or something. It's the one that a lot of armored units have that makes you automatically double attack with increased special gauge on the enemy phase, which is kind of overpowered in my opinion. But yeah, maybe share some comments on what hero skills you'd like to see in this game. Now that I think about it, some of the skills like Live for Bounty, the ones that increase experience and things like that, they could be much more valuable in a mainline Fire Emblem game than in a game that has infinite grinding, so those could be kind of useful. There's also some very heavy hints that magic works the way that it does in Echoes, being a separate command that will most likely consume your HP. I am okay with this personally. I actually really like the magic system in Echoes, for the most part, and there's not really much more that I have to add here, but I just realized something. I would kind of like to see the super long range attacks from Echoes coming back. I liked how some attacks could go up to 3 or even 5 range. It made range classes a lot more useful in some cases. Speaking of range classes being more useful, it looks like bows can counterattack at 1 range now. I love how Intelligent Systems is actually taking steps to balance archers and bows in general. Speaking of which, I really hope that Armor Knights continue to be good. Now, with how amazing they are in Heroes, I'm really looking forward to what they do with armored classes in this game. Actually, that just gave me a thought. I wonder if we'll be seeing any hybrid classes from Heroes like Armor Manicheets. I just really want an Armor Manicheet in a mainline Fire Emblem game because, I don't know, that combination is just cool to me. One other core gameplay thing that I guess I find pretty interesting is aggro lines. Serena's Forest summed it up, saying that in most Fire Emblem games, it's kind of a guessing game which enemies are going to go for which character. It is pretty easy to predict them if you know how the AI works and how the AI reacts to certain things, but actually being able to visually see how your moves are going to be affecting the enemy's AI is interesting. And many people are wondering if the Provoke and Shade skill is going to come back. I would kind of like them to do so. They were always fun in Path of Radiance. Moving away from battle gameplay now, I said that earlier the game reminded me of that hybrid JRPG/RTS idea they had, and it looks like locations are going to be fully explorable now. This feels like a natural step up from Echoes to me. I always found it weird that while dungeons were freely explorable in Echoes, villages and castles weren't, unless they were also dungeons like Duma's Tower. I don't want to speculate too much about things that we don't really know about yet, but in my head, this is to me a combination of Fates' My Castle and the base system from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. You'll have some kind of home base that you go back to between battles, and you can run around the place, buy equipment, talk to characters, and prepare yourself for battle. Now on to the elements of story that we've seen, very minimalistic though it is. And here's the thing, I do not want to engage in any speculation as to how the story is going to play out. Main reason being, a lot of us did that with Fates, I kind of did that too, and many of us ended up being disappointed by what Fates' story actually ended up being. So I feel like this time it's best to go into this with no expectations whatsoever. Just take everything at the trailer at face value, don't speculate on what could be, let's just see what ends up happening. Because I feel like that way we're a lot less likely to be let down. At the very least, it doesn't look like the game is in multiple versions this time, so at least they can dedicate the full development time to focusing and refining one storyline, which I feel is for the best. And the fact that they open the trailer with direct backstory for the setting already shows that they're learning from some of the mistakes they made with Fates' story, so that's a good sign. A lot of people are speculating about the goddess, thinking that this will end up turning into yet another the church is evil and you kill a god at the end plot. Again, I don't want to speculate on what the story could end up being, I'll just wait and see what happens. I will say though that many people are annoyed that they're using the janky cutscene style from Echoes, which I'd say I agree with. I guess now I can talk about two things that you probably want to get my opinion on, even though we don't have any 100% direct confirmation that they'll exist yet. The first is whether or not the protagonist will be an avatar, which many people have suspected will be true. It's actually a little hard to describe my exact feelings on this. I'm sort of leaning negative slightly, but let me just quickly explain why. So, back when Fates was first announced, I was actually really happy that the main character was the avatar this time. I thought that was a good way to do it. That would give the avatar a bit more of an established background, a bit more of an established character, because I thought Robin was decent, but their personality was a little bit generic. I thought the whole concept of Corrin was really interesting, them being a child of two worlds and having dragon powers, and I thought the Avatar being the protagonist was a good way to address the issue that, well, New Mystery and Awakening both suffered from the exact opposite issues. In New Mystery, the Avatar barely had any effect on anything. They were just sort of a side character who occasionally showed up and also talked to people at the base, but they never really affected the story at all. And then in Awakening, the Avatar totally upstaged Chrom as the main character in the last third of the game, to the point where it felt like Chrom really didn't have any reason to be there. And then Fate actually happened, and I witnessed firsthand the inherent problems in making an avatar a direct proxy for the player, the central character of the story. I don't want to go into too much detail here because Fate is old news by now. There's no reason to start flame wars over it anymore. But here's the thing. You might be surprised to hear, do not consider Robin to be a Mary Sue. The only reason I did that for my Awakening playthrough, it was a joke that I carried over from my New Mystery playthrough. With New Mystery, I was like, oh look, a character created by you who's inserted to a pre-existing story. That sounds a lot like a fanfiction. I'm going to name them Mary Sue and make them a parody of fanfiction. And then I found out that Awakening would be set in the same world as Marth's games 2,000 years later, and I thought, okay, for my Awakening playthrough, it's going to be Mary Sue reincarnates 2,000 years later and messes up Awakening's plot. Perfect. It was never meant to be any kind of attack against Robin at all, and I'm sorry that a lot of people felt that way. It was just a personal in-joke of mine that I continued, but I actually don't think Robin is a Mary Sue. Mary Sue is a term that means different things to different people, but I found a really great video that sums up my exact views on what one is, and I'll probably link it in the video description or in a pinned post. It's really interesting. But to sum it up, Mary Sue is a plot trope, not a character trope. A character can be super perfect and have no flaws at all, but if they don't totally dominate the plot like a black hole that sucks in everything around them, they can't be a Mary Sue. Mary Sue is a story trope where the plot is entirely focused on glorifying one character over actually telling a story. And I find that when your main protagonist is very obviously a direct proxy for the player, it's easy to fall into this trap. If you're playing a game that lets you create a character based on yourself, you generally want to feel good about yourself. So because of this, the story will often make that character the subject of everyone's adorations. Everything in the plot that goes badly for them will never be directly their fault. They will never directly be responsible for anything morally questionable. Other characters will take on those tasks for them to keep their hands clean. You get the idea. Basically, I'm not totally against there being an avatar in this game, but I feel that Fates really showed the dangers of how a direct proxy for the player as the protagonist can easily cause the story to get bogged down in stoking the player's ego. I just hope that doesn't end up being the case here. So that's controversial issue number 1 out of the way. Controversial issue number 2, whether or not S supports and marriage will be returning. So, I actually don't have anything against S supports as a concept. Fire Emblem as a series has always had a lot of romance in it, ever since the very beginning. For as long as supports have existed in general, romantic supports have also existed. There are some problems with the current S support system, and I have 3 personal hopes for the new game, though the second is more of an extension of the first. So here it is. I personally think we should go back to the GBA system of every character has a limited pool of love interests, because I feel that that makes it easier to write relationships and make sure that the writers are focused on writing romantic relationships that actually make sense, rather than having to come up with reasons why everyone can marry everyone. I don't think all the romance in Awakening and Fates is inherently bad. There are some very well-written romantic supports across both those games. But there's also a lot that are like C, B, and A are just the characters casually talking to each other and being friends, and then S, suddenly I love you for no reason. Limiting romantic supports might mean we have better overall quality. Now, the extension of this is that I really miss platonic opposite-sex support pairs. If you've seen my playthrough of Sacred Stones, you'll know that I love a lot of support pairs in that game that fit into that category. Amelia and Ducelle in particular is a really great support chain, it's one of my favourites. In any later game, they'd have to awkwardly make those two fall in love, which would be really weird, but back in Sacred Stones, the two of them can have a support where Ducelle kind of acts as her surrogate father or grandfather figure, eventually realizes that he knew her mother, and eventually tells her that her mother, who she thought was dead, actually survived the bandit attack, and their paired ending has Amelia being taken to meet her mother. Path of Radiance has another great example of the type of support relationship that cannot exist in today's anyone can marry anyone system. Khalil and Joffrey. In the C support, Khalil completely falls in love with him, but in the B support, she realizes that he's very obviously in love with Alincia, and so she decides to stop pursuing him and actually help him win Alincia's heart instead. Not every opposite gender pair of characters has to have the hots for each other, basically. I really miss these platonic supports, so hopefully moving back to the GBA system of limited love interests would leave more room for some of these. Finally, here is my third and biggest hope for the support system. If there is a second generation, please do it by a time skip. At this point, we don't know if there even will be a second generation, but I'm really hoping that if there is one, it'll be a time skip. Because the Kid from the Future thing worked in Awakening. It worked in the context of that game, and it was fine. It gave a good excuse for the kids to be fighting alongside their parents, a good excuse to not have their parents' age. Everything was all well and good. It also didn't raise any creepy issues with the younger looking characters, because all it meant was that these characters will have children eventually, but not right now. When the second generation was announced for Fates, my first concern was, they're not going to get away with the same thing twice, so how are the parents and children going to be fighting alongside each other this time? And then they did that. which was very negatively received, raised so many issues, was really stupid, and overall really hurt the reputation of the second generation in that game. There's a lot of people who keep insisting to me, no, the second generation characters are still popular in Fates. Look at the polls. Awakenings polls. Second gens dominate the top 10 for both males and females. Fates, even the most popular children just barely broke into the top 10. And most of the children in Fates are ranked very low in the popularity polls. There is direct evidence that the second gen in Fates were not as well received as they were in Awakening. There may have been character reasons for this, but I think it's mostly the awkward way their existence was handled. Now, there are a few reasons why I understand they haven't gone with a time skip. The first is it's harder to justify the parents and children fighting alongside each other. In FE4, you lost the entire first generation when the game switched gens, so that would be kind of awkward. The second is that most people don't want to see their waifus and husbandos age 20 years. Also, most people don't want to play as a character who gets 20 years older because then they'll find it much harder to relate to them. I understand why that makes them reluctant to do a time skip, but I'm sure there are ways they could handle it. I mean, I'd actually find it kind of refreshing to see everyone look 20 years older. That'd be pretty cool. But even if they didn't want to do that, I mean, you know, you could have some kind of... Everyone could get influenced by some kind of magical dragon blood that makes them not age after 20 years while their children do. That could work. I'm just saying, there are a lot of much better ways to handle it than the Deep Realms. So I just hope we don't see anything like that ever again. Other than that, that's all I really want to say here. There's not really that much we have to go on. I don't want to speculate too much because, like I said, I really don't want to end up let down by setting my hopes too unrealistically high. But overall, I do think this game looks pretty good, and it's not really what I expected from the announcement of the 16th Fire Emblem game, but it's great. I'm probably going to enjoy this one. As for whether or not I'll do a blind playthrough of it like I did with Fates, I'm a little bit conflicted. So on the one hand, I won't have to play 3 routes, that was kind of insane. But on the other hand, the Fates blind run just gave me the feeling that Fire Emblem is not the best series to play blind. So many people were just nitpicking my every decisions in all these maps, not realizing that it was my first time playing ever. Of course, I'm not going to be perfect on my first time. It also wasn't really all that fun playing on casual and not resetting when people died. I ended up getting spoiled a ton on the story, which if I did do this blind, I hopefully would boycott TV tropes, so you wouldn't have to worry about that as much. As for the release date, I'm actually sort of glad that it's not coming until next year. I thought that it being late this year might not give it enough development time, so I hope they really take the time on this one. But anyway, that's all I want to say, and I'll see you next time.